Hello everyone. The topic that I am taking today is pernicious anemia. Pernicious anemia term was coined by Berman and it was called so because it was considered to be a very deadly disease and having a lot of deleterious effects. But now we know that it is a disease with a possible cure. So it is a chronic disease of elderly population. This is important that it occurs mostly after the age of 60. If it is happening under the age of 30, then usually it is associated with other autoimmune diseases. And genetic predisposition is present in case of pernicious anemia. And this is an autoimmune disease, and there is atrophy of parietal cells, which will lead to decreased absorption of vitamin B12 from the terminal ileum. So we should be knowing about the pathophysiology of pernicious anemia, and before knowing about the pathogenesis, we should know the normal physiology of vitamin B12 absorption. So vitamin B12 or cobalamin, daily requirement is about 2 to 3 microgram in our diet, and the sources of B12 are mainly the animal meat and the dairy products. So if a person is vegetarian, or more importantly if he is vegan and he is not even taking the dairy products, then he or she is prone to develop the vitamin B12 deficiency. So B12 in our diet is bound to a animal protein, and when it reaches our body, it reaches the stomach. In the stomach, by the action of the pepsin enzyme which is secreted by the gastric parietal cells, this animal protein gets dissociated from B12, and here this vitamin B12 gets bind to another protein which is released in the salivary fluid, which is known as haptocorin or R binder. Now this haptocorin binds to B12 and it reaches the loop of the C loop of the duodenum. Now here this haptocorin, again it gets dissociated from the B12 by the action of pancreatic proteases. Now after that, this B12 will get bind to another glycoprotein which is known as intrinsic factor. So intrinsic factor of Castle, it is released by the parietal cell. It is a glycoprotein and it is most important factor in the absorption of vitamin B12. So now after it reaches the duodenum, it will bind with the intrinsic factor. So now vitamin B12 will travel through the intestines and reach the terminal ileum. In the terminal ileum, the cells possess the receptor for the intrinsic factor known as tubulin. So this is the tubulin receptor. So intrinsic factor, which is already bound to vitamin B12, will bind to this receptor, and then it will be internalized in the ileal cells. In the ileal cells, there is a transfer protein known as transcobalamin 2. So now B12 will bind to it, and with it, it will travel in the bloodstream, and in the bloodstream it will reach the liver also, where it will get stored. So it goes to the blood and the liver, bound to transcobalamin 2. So a minor fraction of vitamin B12 is also absorbed by the passive diffusion, and these are the important points regarding the physiology of B12 absorption. Now we come to the pathophysiology. So in the pathophysiology, the antibodies, they are formed in the pernicious anemia against the gastric parietal cells and against the intrinsic factor. So these antibodies, they first of all they prevent the they decrease the concentration of intrinsic factor. Secondly, they also interrupt the binding of B12 to intrinsic factor, and also binding of intrinsic factor vitamin B12 complex to this tubulin receptor. So all because of all these factors, there is decreased absorption of vitamin B12 in the ileum, leading to the B12 deficiency. So besides the pernicious anemia, there are also other causes of vitamin B12 deficiency which will ultimately lead to the megaloblastic anemia. So what are the other causes? One is the decreased intake. If the diet is inadequate, or if it is a strict vegetarian or vegan diet, then it will cause the pernicious anemia. Then the other causes impaired absorption of pernicious anemia, which I will be talking about, and other factors can be gastrectomy. If the stomach is removed surgically for any cause, then it will obviously cause the decrease in the intrinsic factor. Then other malabsorption states like celiac sprue. So if there is malabsorption, then also this will not be absorbed. B12 will not be absorbed. Then if there is intestinal disease like lymphoma, systemic sclerosis, again there will be defective absorption of B12. Then if there is resection of the ileum, or if there is inflammation of the ileum known as ileitis, then again there will be defective absorption of B12, leading to the decreased B12 and megaloblastic anemia. And other causes, if there is competitive parasitic uptake, so there is a fish tapeworm also known as Diphyllobothrum latum. So if it is present in the intestine, then it will compete with B12 for the absorption. So it will be requiring B12 for its growth. So there will be competitive parasitic uptake. And so you have to remember the name of this fish tapeworm. So Diphyllobothrum latum. So often comes in MCQ, and this will again cause decrease in the B12 levels in the body. Then again bacterial overgrowth, if there is bacterial overgrowth in blind loops or bowel diverticula, then again there will be decreased B12 levels. And other causes can be if there is increased demand of the body for B12, like in case of pregnancy, hyperthyroidism, disseminated cancers and chronic infection, then again there will be, if the demand is increased, then there can be decrease in the B12 levels in the body. So these are the various causes of megaloblastic anemia which are caused due to the B12 deficiency. Now megaloblastic anemia can be caused by B12 or folate or the combined deficiency, and these are the causes for decreased B12. Now pathogenesis, as I already told, it is an autoimmune disease. So there is autoimmune attack on the gastric mucosa, and often pernicious anemia, which is itself autoimmune disease, it is associated with other autoimmune disorders like autoimmune thyroiditis and autoimmune adrenalitis, diseases like type 1 diabetes mellitus or Addison's disease. So this is important to know, and in those cases where these diseases are associated with each other, then it occurs at a younger age group. Now autoimmune atrophic gastritis, it spares the antrum, it involves the body and fundus. This is important for MCQ. This is in contrast to H. pylori gastritis. So the chronic atrophic gastritis, it occurs due to two important causes. One is autoimmune atrophic gastritis known as type A gastritis, and H. pylori gastritis known as type B gastritis. So H. pylori gastritis involves the antrum. This is important MCQ. While autoimmune atrophic gastritis, it will involve the body and the fundus. Now this autoimmune comprises of about 10% cases of chronic gastritis, while 90% of cases are because of the H. pylori gastritis. Now in the important features of autoimmune gastritis are, there will be antibodies to parietal cells and to the intrinsic factor, and these antibodies will be detectable in the serum and gastric secretion of that person. Then there will be decreased B12 deficiency because of the defective absorption in the ileum. Then there will be decrease in the serum pepsinogen concentration, so because the chief cells are also affected. Then there will be defective gastric acid secretion, since you know that the parietal cells also secrete the hydrochloric acid, so there will be achlorhydria. And because of this damage to the parietal cells, there will be endocrine cell hyperplasia, leading to the hypergastrinemia. So these are the important salient features of autoimmune gastritis. Next, we should know the important antibodies in pernicious anemia. So there are three types, 1, 2 and 3. One is the most common antibody, which blocks the binding of B12 to the intrinsic factor. So in this way, it will decrease the absorption of B12. The second type, type 2, they prevent the binding of the intrinsic factor vitamin B12 complex to its receptors in the ileum. And the type 3 antibodies, they are not specific, and they recognize the gastric proton pump of the parietal cells. So they are directed against the parietal cells. So these are the three important antibodies, and most common antibody is the type 1 antibody. Now the biochemical function of vitamin B12, they are important to know, so that we understand the clinical manifestations of B12 deficiency. So there are two important reactions where B12 is involved. So in the first reaction, the thymidine monophosphate is formed with the help of the B12. So B12, the cobalamin, it acts as a cofactor for the reaction in which methionine gets converted to homocysteine, and again the N5-methyl tetrahydrofolate get converted to tetrahydrofolate. Now this again gets converted to N510 methylene tetrahydrofolate. So this again acts as a cofactor for the conversion of DUMP to DTMP. So this thymidine monophosphate is important building block for DNA. So this is the most important thing, that this methylcobalamin or vitamin B12, it is ultimately helping in building of the DNA. So DNA formation will be impaired if there is decreased vitamin B12. And in this reaction also folate is also important, because folate is also playing an important role in this reaction. So because of both folate and vitamin B12, there will be defective DNA synthesis. So this is important pathology in B12 deficiency. The second important reaction is that it helps in the conversion of methylmalonyl coenzyme A to succinyl coenzyme A. Again, in this cobalamin or vitamin B12 is required as a cofactor, and this succinyl coenzyme A is important because it helps in the incorporation of the important lipids in the myelin sheath of the nerves. So this reaction tells us why this vitamin B12 is important for the deficiency of B12 is responsible for the neurological manifestation in case of pernicious anemia. So if succinyl coenzyme A is not formed, there will be defective myelin synthesis in the nerves. The other important point which we can derive from this reaction is that if this is not converted to succinyl coenzyme A, then they will be increased in the serum and urine levels of methylmalonic acid. Now again, this is an important differentiating point to differentiate whether the megaloblastic anemia is because of vitamin B12 deficiency or folate deficiency. So in B12 deficiency, this will be increased, while in folate deficiency, this will be normal. So these are two important reactions. So we derive two facts from these reactions. First, the B12 is responsible for the DNA synthesis, since it is helping in the formation of the building blocks for DNA like TMP. Then second is that succinyl coenzyme A important for the myelination of the peripheral nerves. So neurological manifestation are seen in case of B12 deficiency, while it is not seen in case of folate deficiency. Now this is the summary of pernicious anemia pathophysiology. So there is autoimmune gastritis. We know that pernicious anemia is because of autoimmune mechanisms lead to chronic gastric atrophy or chronic atrophic gastritis. There will be loss of parietal cells, there will be loss of intrinsic factor, because of which there will be decrease in the absorption of dietary B12. Now it will ultimately cause the B12 deficiency in the body, and it will manifest as, first of all, megaloblastic anemia. Second, there will be atrophic glossitis, there will be smooth glaze like tongue. Then peripheral neuropathy, so neurological symptoms will be there, peripheral neuropathy and subacute combined degeneration of the spinal cord. So this is the summary of the pathophysiology of pernicious anemia. Now there will be anemia because there is defective DNA formation. So the RBC precursors, they will be large in size, that's why it is called megaloblastic anemia, and they will be premature. They will be premature apoptosis of those cells. So the RBC lifespan will also decrease. The precursors of RBC, they will die early. That will lead to anemia, and all this is because of the defective DNA synthesis. Although the cytoplasmic maturation will be normal, but the nuclear maturation will be defective. So there will be nuclear cytoplasmic asynchrony. So their maturation will not be synchronous. That will lead to the anemia. Secondly, since it is a defect of DNA maturation, so this will also affect the WBC lineage and also the platelet lineage. So there can be pancytopenia. So all the precursors of WBCs, platelets and RBCs, they can be affected in the bone marrow because of the defective DNA maturation, and it can lead to pancytopenia. And megaloblastic anemia, it is a very important and common cause for pancytopenia. So then stomatitis can be there, then glossitis, also known as atrophic glossitis, common in pernicious anemia. Then again jaundice can be due to, because RBC lifespan is less, the RBCs, they die prematurely, and because of the cells which are lysing the RBCs, they can be jaundice. Then neurological features will be there: subacute combined degeneration of the cord and peripheral neuropathy, and this is exclusively seen in the B12 deficiency, not in the folate deficiency. Additionally, in case of pernicious anemia, there is increased risk for gastric carcinoma, and because of the increased homocysteine levels, there will be increased risk for atherosclerosis and thrombosis. Now, lastly, the morphology in the blood, bone marrow, GIT and CNS. So in GIT, there is the atrophic gastritis, autoimmune atrophic gastritis. So there will be loss of the parietal cells and chief cells, and instead there will be intestinal metaplasia. So the gastric mucosal cells, they will show the more increased number of goblet cells. So secondly, since it is chronic gastritis, so the cells or the players of the chronic inflammation, like lymphocyte plasma cells, they will be prominent in the mucosa. Now, megaloblastic changes will be seen in the mucosal cells, since it is megaloblastic, since the B12 levels are decreasing and DNA maturation defect is there. So megaloblastic changes will be seen. The cells, the nuclear maturation will be defective here also. Then in the GIT, there will be atrophic leucitis. This is another feature in the GIT. Now in this HND image, these are the glands, gastric glands, and all these are the lymphocytes and plasma cells. So these are the chronic inflammatory infiltrate. And in this picture, we can see these are the interspersed goblet cells, since there is intestinal metaplasia. So these are the goblet cells with presence of mucin. These are goblet cells. Now next, the blood findings. So hemoglobin will be decreased, since RBCs they are dying prematurely. There is defect in the maturation of the nucleus in the precursors of RBCs. So the hemoglobin will be decreased. Then the cells will be large in size. So macrocytosis. So in megaloblastic anemia or macrocytosis, generally MCV is more than 100 femtoliters. Normal MCV is 80 to 100 femtoliters. If it is less than 80, we call it macrocytic RBC. If it is more than 100, we call it macrocytic RBC. Then there will be macroovalocytes. So important point is that in the megaloblastic macrocytic anemia, the macrocytes will be oval in shape. So they are called macroovalocyte. While in case of macrocytic anemia having a non-megaloblastic cause, they will be round macrocytes. This is the important difference between megaloblastic and non-megaloblastic macrocytic anemia. Then Hobble-Jolly bodies will be seen, which are remnants of the RNA and ribosomes, and they are seen because of the ineffective erythropoiesis. Now MCH will be increased, MCHC will be normal. Then again pancytopenia can be there. So TLC count will be reduced, platelet count will be reduced, resulting in the pancytopenia. And accordingly, the clinical signs symptoms of pancytopenia can also be seen, like recurrent infections or subleading manifestations. Then another important feature, very important feature, is hypersegmented neutrophils. So we call a neutrophil as hypersegmented when there are more than 5% of the neutrophils having 5 or more lobes. Normally the neutrophil has 3 to 5 lobes. So if more than 5% cells have 5 or more lobes, or even if a single neutrophil has 6 or more lobes, then we call it a hypersegmented neutrophil, and it will be seen in case of megaloblastic anemia. So next is reticulocyte count, which will be low or normal. If we give the correct treatment of megaloblastic anemia, then on the 5th day the reticulocyte count will increase, and that is known as the reticulocyte response. Normal reticulocyte count is 0.5 to 2% in case of adult. This is a picture which is showing the macrovalocytes. So these are lymphocyte, and its size of the lymphocyte is about 8 to 9 microns, and the nucleus is of the size of RBC. So to appreciate the size of RBC, we compare it with the lymphocyte. So now here it is larger than the lymphocyte, so it is a macrocyte, and it is oval in shape. So we call it the macrovalocyte, which is a feature for megaloblastic anemia. Then again, this is a picture from Robbins, and it shows a hypersegmented neutrophil. We can see the multiple lobes. Now this is one lobe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lobes. So the hypersegmented nucleus of a neutrophil. Now in the bone marrow will be hypercellular. So there will be response from the erythroblast. They will try to multiply since there is a lot of anemia. But that erythropoiesis will be ineffective because the RBC lifespan is decreasing. The DNA maturation is defective, although cytoplasm is maturing normally, but the nucleus is not maturing properly. So nuclear size will increase. There will be ineffective erythropoiesis. RBC will die prematurely. Now giant megaloblastic anemia is called so because all the cells, they have become large in size because of defective nuclear maturation. So giant band forms, giant metamyelocytes, they will be seen. Giant megakaryocytes will again, they will be seen. So you have to remember that there is defective DNA synthesis, and it is also seen in the folate deficiency along with the B12 deficiency. Now this is a bone marrow picture, and this is a giant band form, and these are the erythroblast. So their nucleus is showing the sieve-like chromatin. So this is the important feature for megaloblast. So when the nucleus has this sieve-like property, the appearance sieve-like, then we call it as megaloblast. So these are the megaloblasts seen in case of megaloblastic anemia, and this is a giant strap form, and again sieve-like chromatin seen here. What is more appreciated in these pictures, you can see these white spaces. So it is looking like a sieve, like a net. Again picture from Robbins. So this is a megaloblast showing a sieve-like chromatin. Again in these pictures you can appreciate the sieve-like chromatin. This is a normal orthochromatic erythroblast. See, this is a nucleus which is highly condensed, and this is well hemoglobinized cytoplasm, and this is a nucleus which is eccentric. So this is a orthochromatic erythroblast, and this is normal. While in this picture you can see this is a orthochromatic erythroblast, but the nucleus is showing the megaloblastic change. So here you can see the nucleus is pycnotic, it is highly condensed, while here it is not pycnotic and it is showing this sieve-like chromatin. And these are the granulocyte precursors, and these are neutrophils. So the important thing to note is the sieve-like chromatin of megaloblast, and again here this is the sieve-like chromatin. Now for the lab diagnosis, the serum antibodies against the intrinsic factors will be there. Then as I told you earlier, the methylmalonic acid will be increased, and this is the important lab test to differentiate between B12 deficiency and folate deficiency. In folate deficiency, this will be normal in the serum. Now homocystinemia will be there. So next, decreased vitamin B12 levels in the serum. Then increased serum LDH will be there because the RBC turnover is increasing. The RBCs, they are dying. So there will be increased serum LDH. Then blood findings, as I told earlier. Then reticulocyte response also, I told you that if we give correct treatment with B12, we identify the deficiency of B12 and we give the correct treatment, then reticulocyte count will increase on the 5th day. So that will tell us that our diagnosis was correct and we were giving the right treatment. The bone marrow examination is very much diagnostic for megaloblastic anemia. We call anemia as megaloblastic only when we find the characteristic megaloblast in the bone marrow of that patient. And lastly, there is a test known as Schilling's test. So this is often asked in the viva and often asked in the exams. So Schilling test will help us in differentiate the cause of the B12 deficiency. So it will tell us where is the defect in the absorption of B12. So in Schilling test, what we do, we give orally 1 microgram of radio-labeled B12. So it will be radio-labeled generally with cobalt, and it is given orally. While we give a high dose like 1000 microgram of unlabeled B12. This is unlabeled, and this is given to saturate the body stores of B12 so that this radio-labeled B12 is absorbed in the body and then excreted in the urine. So this 1 microgram, it will be given orally. Then this high dose will be given intramuscularly after 1 hour, and after that we assume that this B12 is absorbed normally in the ileum. It binds to the intrinsic factor, and then it gets absorbed in the terminal ileum, and then it will go to the kidney. It will excrete it in the urine. So if everything is normal in an ideal scenario, about 10% of this radio-labeled B12 which we gave orally, it will be excreted in urine, and we will, since it is radio-labeled, so we can detect its levels. So this is what happens in the ideal scenario. If 10%, which is the normal, 10% is not excreted in the urine, then we label that stage as abnormal. The stage 1 is abnormal. So again we will repeat the stage 1. Again we will give that dose of vitamin B12 radio labeled, but in addition to the oral intrinsic factor. So in the stage 2 we give vitamin B12 along with oral intrinsic factor, because we want to check whether the defective absorption which occurred in stage 1 was due to intrinsic factor deficiency or not. So now if it is intrinsic factor deficiency, then it will get corrected, and about 10% of the oral B12 will get excreted in the urine. So this is about the stage 1 and stage 2. But if again after stage 2 we get the abnormal results, then we suspect that whether there is bacterial growth in the intestine which is causing the competitive uptake of vitamin B12. So in the stage 3, now after stage 1 is abnormal, then again stage 2 is abnormal, we try to give patient antibiotics for 2 weeks, and after that again we do the Schilling's test. After that again we give the oral vitamin B12 which is radio labeled. So now if it is corrected after stage 3, that is after giving antibiotics for 2 weeks, we can make out that the defective stage 2 was because of the abnormal bacterial growth, so which we corrected with the antibiotics. So this is a stage 3. And even after stage 3, if there are abnormal results, that means even there is no abnormal bacterial growth, there is some other reason for the B12 absorption defect. So now we will detect whether there is any problem with the pancreas. So now again we will give the patient pancreatic enzymes for 3 days, and again we will give the radioactive dose of B12. So these are the 4 stages of Schilling's test which we do to detect that at which level there is the malabsorption of B12 taking place. So in 1 we give the B12 radio labeled, and then we detect the levels in the urine. If it is defective, we suspect that intrinsic factor is lacking, and in stage 2 we give the B12 along with an oral intrinsic factor. Now if it gets corrected, we know that it is surely due to the defective intrinsic factor secretion. But again if it is abnormal, we suspect that it is because of the abnormal bacterial growth, and we will give antibiotics for 2 weeks. Now if it gets corrected after that, though we are sure that it was because of the abnormal bacterial growth. But if it is still abnormal result, then we give the pancreatic enzymes and for 3 days. So after that we will be detecting the normal excretion of B12. So these are the 4 important stages of Schilling's test, and it is often asked in the viva as well as the theory exam. Now lastly, the treatment. So parenteral B12 will be given since the oral absorption is defective, intestinal absorption is defective, so we give parenteral B12, and high doses can be given. So the anemia will be cured, and the bone marrow changes will be reversed, the blood changes will be reversed, but the gastric mucosa changes will not be reversed, because the primary antibody in the pernicious anemia is directed against the parietal cells, and that defect we cannot improve by giving the B12. So the risk of carcinoma will remain the same. The gastric mucosa, the changes, they will remain the same, but the reticulocyte response will be there. When we give the correct treatment on the 5th day, reticulocyte will be increased, and the bone marrow will recover, and the blood changes will also be reversible. So but the gastric atrophy and the autoimmune changes, they will persist. Now the last point is the folate deficiency has similar clinical features, but there is no neurological abnormalities in case of folate deficiency. So this is all about the pernicious anemia, which is an important topic for exams. So if any doubts, you can ask in the comment section. So thank you very much.